Hello, hello, and welcome to This Week in the Middle East with myself, Francis Matthew. I bring apologies from Eddie O'Sullivan, who is on holiday in Italy, walking the Appian Way. Today I'm joined by Bader Al Saif. Let me bring him in. Bader, welcome. Welcome to the program. Bader, you're the head of Al Saif Consulting, and you're an assistant professor at Kuwait University. You also are a visiting fellow at both Chatham House and the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. So you're a very busy man. Thank you for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you. I'm not quite visiting, though I would think that visiting is a good thing to do, but I'm an associate fellow in both institutions.
Apologies. You have status there. Great. Well, there's a lot to talk about. So perhaps we can begin the big events happening in this week. We saw the sad funeral of Pope Francis, who had considerable links in both the Middle East and worldwide.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with you, Francis. I'm mindful of the very lovely exchanges that we had via email when it came to remembering Pope Francis and his legacy and how he has touched many lives. Speaking from Kuwait, where I am today, and even within Kuwait University, we look at Pope Francis with high esteem in the region. And he's a person that we mourn. He's a visionary that reached out beyond the confines of the church. He was the first pope to visit the Arabian Peninsula. We saw him visit us in both the UAE and Manama, Bahrain. And he has, done extensive outreach, not only to the Arab states in general, but also to various communities within the Muslim world. And I'm here thinking of his visit to Iraq and his very famous gathering with Sheikh Sistani, Ayatollah Sistani. And that's also something to remember. His humanness has only been instructive to all of us. And I remember with fondness his final mass and how he mentioned the people of Gaza and how he was very caring in the sense that he reached out to the parish on a daily call. Imagine that, every single day. And why do I want to take a moment and speak about Pope Francis? Because we live through the challenge of diversity and managing difference and accepting one another. And this is a theme that we all strive very hard to work on. And he has been quite exemplary in that regard. And I just hope that we can continue in that spirit, as do many Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars, and many others from other religions walk in that path.
I can only echo your thoughts. When he came to Abu Dhabi with that declaration of the shared humanity, and he and Sheikh Ahmed Tayyib and the Jewish rabbis signed this, echoing that we all need to work together. So I fully agree and mourn his loss, hoping that the future will remember what he did. In that spirit of reaching out, if we can move on from the sublime to the immediate, the new American administration in Washington under President Trump on his second round at it is reaching out to Iran. Now, this is the American president who first time left the JCPOA, Obama's 2015 nuclear deal. And so, yet they seem to have an agreement. Trump has come in with his usual heavy-handed saying, you should never, never, never have nuclear weapons. And the Iranians have said, well, we don't want them. And so apparently in Muscat, over the last round of talks, they have reached an agreement that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. But why, in your view, what's happening? And why should Iran trust America with the very president who pulled out of the deal they had in the first place?
Well, let me tell you, where we stand in the Gulf is that we welcome de-escalation. We welcome friendly relations with all neighbors, including Iran. And we just hope that everyone in the region and beyond looks at each other from an equal standpoint, and that there is respect for sovereignty, non-interference in other countries' affairs, and to try and work what the Gulf has been relatively managing compared to its neighborhood in the Middle East, and that is the focus on the human and the focus on peace and prosperity. And if we can all focus on that file, we can all thrive together. So I think that's the spirit that the Gulf states have been coming through with. And let me tell you, the Gulf has been very central to all of this. Now, in the first version, or the JCPOA, the talks started in Oman. Now, the second round under Trump 2.0 has also resumed in Oman. So there is a central role to be played through the Omani lens. And it's not the only lens that's been out there. We've seen very active diplomacy in the region. We've seen the Saudis dispatch the defense minister in quite a rare senior visit to Iran just recently, just this week. And you have President Trump visiting Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE in mid-May. So there is a lot of action that's taking place. And I think where we come from it is we want to live in a very peaceful region where everyone has the right to exist and where we can solve intractable files. Now, I know we're going to get into Palestine later, but that's on the top of the list when it comes to intractable files. In terms of Iran, I think why should they trust Trump? Going back to your question, well, he is the one who disbanded this whole deal. So he has now the chance to come back with better guarantees for the Iranians. The Iranians are being faced with a different set of individuals managing the negotiation. I think that was a welcome development for them. They've always castigated the political class in the US as some group of people that do not want to engage with Iran, that have old baggage, and so on. So to have Steve Witkoff, who is, not part of the establishment until very recently, and a non-politician in his own right,
yes,
to be part of that, and with a very direct line of access to Trump, I think that sends an encouraging signal. But let me tell you this, and I've said this ever since the talks have started, and I've believed in it even longer than that, those discussions shouldn't be restricted to the nuclear file alone.
This is important.
This was a position that has been held by various Gulf capitals. And Francis, it's a position that's not only for the benefit of the Gulf states, but for the benefit of both Iran, the US, and the international community. Iran is facing a lot of issues and challenges right now. And those challenges will not be resolved if sanctions are lifted right away and if the nuclear file is resolved. We need to talk about all files together. We need to understand how the missile defense system that they have in place is going to impact the relations with the neighbors. That can also be brought up, by the way, in discussion with the American presence in the region. I think all cards should be displayed. And equally important, although many have downplayed its importance, I would think of Iran's activity in the region. Now, some would call it the axis of resistance, some would call it the proxy groups, the militias, you name it, whatever you do. But the premise being that any given country has the resources and the will to quite openly interfere in other countries' affairs through arms and through, supporting with certain destabilizing activity should be part of the past. We've seen how 2024 has disrupted that notion. Now, why do I tell you people have deprioritized it? Because they claim that many parts of this axis has been in disarray in the last few months, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, and so on. But I would claim otherwise. I mean, if the spirit is still there, that there should be a notion of resistance to a bigger evil, that resistance coming through arms is something that will be disruptive to the region. And it would be mimicking the already very disruptive Israeli behavior, which tends to want to change things on the ground violently. And we condone this. This shouldn't be done by any party, and we should have the higher road in which dignities are reasserted, lives are saved and protected, and everyone's prosperity is sought after. Look, this is a long call. I know this may sound optimistic, idealistic, utopian, you name it, whatever you want. But I think we need to start from somewhere. And that's the starting premise for many in the Gulf states.
But if I can just question now, I mean, Obama kept the focus on the nuclear because it was easier to deal with. And he kept a very narrow focus to the Gulf states' fury, as you say. But Iran part of its constitution is to spread the message, to spread the revolution. And so a lot of what its basis is all about is carrying the message, carrying its activities out. So if you include the militias, which as you say, have been hammered, some of them, others are still there, surely that is a huge change in Iranian thinking.
And let me tell you, the Iranian constitution has been well lived up to in the first decade or two of the republic's existence. Now, that's still there, but is it being exercised? And is it being exercised to the benefit of the Iranian people and the cause? And some could argue yes, and some could argue no. I think that's why having a much broader negotiation would serve the Iranian people and the regime even better. Because you need to think and reflect on who you are as a nation. And where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And look, and I'm putting it into context because it's not me that's broadening the negotiation. The Iranians themselves have suggested that, Iranian markets are open to US investments. So in that sense, if you're going to be opening up to that kind of intervention, it's an intervention that we've had in the Gulf states for decades, which was frowned upon by Iran. And it's not the time to blame, but it's the time to think comprehensively about lasting solutions. And Iran is at the cusp of many changes. I mean, the Khamenei, the Murshid, is not getting younger.
Right.
There is what could be a generational change. There could be a change of guards. So I think many within Iran and across are looking at that carefully. Now, Trump's and his administration can surprise us as he has with many other files. Do we think he's going to build hotels in Tehran and other cities as the Iranians have been lobbying for, even if, at a very initial phase? Or is he going to bomb Iran? He could do both. And even with those discussions moving forward,
probably either.
It could, exactly. So you never know. I mean, and we've heard of the Israeli lobbying at the very highest levels in DC to try to get this done, to slow the nuclear program through some airstrikes and other means, and they would need US assistance for that regard. That would not be a welcome development for us in the region, because we do not believe that going at it in the violent way will solve solutions. We've seen the region witness war upon war, and none of these wars, and if I can just accept or put an exception for the second Gulf War that liberated Kuwait. I mean, there was an immediate cause and a resolution to it. But everything else has been really, it pushed the region into the brink of various outfits: Iran-Iraq war, the invasion of the US in Iraq, so and so on and so forth. So I don't think, and the current war is another very, very, very big red flag that needs to be taken into account as well. The region needs some breathing space, Francis. We need to breathe. We're normal humans. We have normal needs, and it shouldn't be always seen through the lens of violence.
And so, to close on Iran, you're on a range of hopeful to unhopeful. You feel that something may come out of this.
I feel something may come out, and it's the funny thing is it may come out in either way. It could be a grand negotiated deal, or it could be violent, Francis.
Yes.
I'm not taking a side over the other, just because the policy making circle. I mean, we're dealing with what can be seen as a temporary government. I mean, the administration in DC hasn't been filled. There are many vacancies. They're dealing with many domestic issues. So those that are holding the levers are quite few, and they're close to the president. And that can take him either way, because he's surrounded by different philosophical views: the globalists, the neocons, the isolationists. Yeah. You see it unfold right now with their airstrikes on Yemen, for example, and the Houthis. What's the end game? That's my question. And I would transfer that same question to Iran. What's the end game when you attack in that way? It's not going to change things as drastically as you'd like them to.
So we wait and see. But moving to Saudi Arabia, who are a key player in this, Saudi Arabia has already started a long process of reaching out to Iran. The 2023 accord was there, with brokered rather surprisingly by China. they also have a relationship. They seem to be encouraging what's happening, as you say, supporting trade, prosperity. But looking back the other way, they also are looking for a defense deal with America. They've been talking about it with Biden's administration. The Trump administration would quite like to expand the Abraham Accords. But the Saudi Arabia has been very clear. It will not go into a defense deal if that requires a peace treaty with Israel.
I mean, sure, look, it started as a trilateral logic in which three countries fit into the different puzzle, being Israel, the US, Saudi, with Palestinian concerns coming through the Saudi lens. And that's what many in the DC community have missed out on, or try not to focus on. That the Saudis, even in their dealings prior to October 7, have always had an analogous line with the Palestinian Authority that would show or share with them how they can move their status forward when it comes to actualizing a state. Now, that was moving in tandem until the attacks happened, and then it changed a lot of the things on the ground. But
Yes.
the support of Palestinians withstood. I mean, it didn't change either before or after. And that's what you see now. Now, the defense treaty with the US can be argued as a bilateral deal as well. Without the Israel component, there is the logic there. If the fight is a fight between the US and China, as many in the US have been trying to market it as, then you need to have certain key markets and hubs that are squarely within the understandings of the US.
And sorry to, but would you say that Congress would agree with you?
Congress is currently Republican dominated Republican Congress, so it's under the belt of Mr. Trump at this stage. If he has a lobbying agenda that pushes those people forward, I think he can get his way through.
Okay.
And we've seen this with various cases already when it comes to budget extensions and what have you. Now, but that's, I think, what's coming now on the way is even a bigger deal when it comes to not only defense, but defense, trade, technology. I think both parties in the US and Riyadh are looking at things in a more expansive lens. And that's where the US can reinsert itself in global affairs. I mean, it's the Trump administration is trying to upend the world that we know since the end of World War II. Right? When it comes to free trade, yes, the international trade system. So there needs to be a replacement if they are to lead. And I think that's still an interest of theirs. I mean, many think that they're receding, they're isolating themselves. I don't see that. I just see a different kind of leadership. But that's still brewing. So we need to see the elements of that. And I think the Gulf can give an able hand to the Americans. We've long known, Francis, that the oil for security pact is long dead. I mean, we've seen it, you've seen it being tested across administrations, Republican and Democratic, and they didn't deliver as expected from the Gulf side. I'm thinking 2019 Abqaiq Khrais oil field attacks. Yes. I'm thinking 2022 Houthi attacks on Abu Dhabi's airport. So we're certain that that's not there. So how can we develop it in a post-oil era, which, again, the Gulf states have a very ambitious post-oil agenda and their vision plans and their, clean energy plans and their AI transition. So there's a lot that's happening there that the US and the Gulf states can work together on. And I think that's how we need to think, moving the relationship forward.
But if we're talking defense, in terms of the big players, America remains the totally active player.
Totally. And that's so, let me stop at that, Francis. That's why when people tell me the unipolar moment is over, we're transitioning, I tell them, hold your horses. I can't call it a multipolar world yet. I mean, I look around me, in the region. I mean, what is the biggest number of bases? Who has the biggest, defense budget in the world? And even the IMF just released its last, assessment report or whatever they call it during their meetings in DC. And again, as we know, the US occupies the lion's share when it comes to the world's GDP. I mean, they're close to 20 something, 20 plus. Next to it is China. and then comes several European countries. So that notion of even in their presence in the Gulf, there was that understanding among Gulf elites and policymakers that the US is withdrawing itself. And I think they've come to terms between the Americans and the Gulf statesmen that it's not so much receding, it's reorienting. Okay. And I think the Gulf itself has been reorienting. So we've been doing that in parallel.
One of the issues which America remains absolutely essential to is Palestine and Israel. We've got the shocking war continuing in Gaza. We've got Hamas still in control of Gaza. We've got a relatively ineffective Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. And we've got Netanyahu, I believe, relatively okay with the situation. I think he probably needs to have an enemy in Gaza to fight. I don't think he wants any kind of Riviera on the Gulf, as Trump came up with rather bizarrely, or even the Arab solution came through of a much longer term plan to put money in and rebuild a new administration. I don't think Netanyahu wants either of these. So I'm concerned that the outlook, not what should happen, but what might happen, may well happen, is a continued occupation. This is the administration in Washington who recognized annexation, and so the West Bank could be in play. So I think it's a relatively dangerous outlook for any hopes of a two-state solution. And I can't see much other option. But maybe you have a different view, or I don't know where you see what's happening in Palestine.
Look, it's a bleak picture indeed. And Palestine was and continues to be a central pillar in Gulf foreign policy. This is an occupied land, an occupied people, and the whole world. I mean, let me tell you, you'll go into those UNGA resolutions and you look at the number of countries that either recognize Palestine or those that demonstrate compassion and support to the Palestinians. It's humongous. And we're just, thinking of a handful of countries that don't subscribe to that, with the US and Israel being on top of these, unfortunately. Look, let's start with the basics. And I'm glad that you do mention the occupation, because there you go. It's an occupation. We know when it started and it should end. And recognition, which has been happening by various countries, is a good step indeed. But beyond the symbolism that comes with it, we need to move into further tools. We need to look at sanctions. We need to look at different ways to change the behavior of the people on the ground. Now, Palestinians have been dehumanized for too long, and they cannot and should not be. No one should be going through what they're going through. This is ABC humanity. And we started with Pope Francis, but it doesn't need the passing of a pope to remind us of this. This is something that's shared by all of us, regardless of religion, creed, sect, ethnicity, and what have you. Now, you look at the different solutions, Francis, and as you said, if it's either continued occupation, which is very clearly the agenda of the far right, or you can call it the new right. I mean, they've been quite central in Israeli politics in the last few years. And they quite openly tell you, we're not into two-state solutions. I mean, we're not going to even talk about it. And what's funny to me? We've switched roles. So in the earlier decades of the 20th century, in the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s, it was the Arabs that were objecting to Israel's right to existence. And now it has just flipped around. The Gulf states, the Arabs have presented one proposal after the other. And I go back all the way, people think of the 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative from the Beirut Summit as the start of it. But I even go further. I mean, King Fahd, then Crown Prince Fahd in 1981, 82, he came out with an open hand to dealing with the situation, even without naming Israel. That came later. So the Israeli people, because they're the ones who vote in these people, they need to understand where they sit in the region. And they need to understand as well that they need the region if they want to maintain and coexist with everyone around them. They can't continue leaning forward on the US to protect them and to reinforce them with defense mechanisms and what have you. It takes working with one another. And the Arab states have come more and over again by guaranteeing the two-state solution and the Palestinians forward if that opportunity is given to them. You block people and they resist because they have no other pathway to living a dignified life. So that needs to be resolved. Now, is it going to be a one-state solution where you end up with an apartheid system in which some people, a sizable Palestinian population, isn't given equal rights? That's also not going to last. So your best bet is a two-state solution. And the Saudis have, with the European Union and Norway, have come up with a very interesting proposition. Following, actually, the Abraham Accords came as an outside-in approach to shake the file in ways that has been frozen for decades between the Israelis and Palestinians. What was announced last September in the UN by the Saudis, the EU, and Norway, the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. And the word implementation is key, Francis. We're not talking a process. We've learned enough from Oslo. We're not going to do that. There needs to be a very clear plan, timetable that thinks from the last point and then moves backwards. I think that's what needs to be done. And those three parties have been quite innovative in holding monthly meetings that unfortunately doesn't see the US and Israel attend, but at least to have each country present what it can provide to the two-state solution. Could it be training of personnel? Could it be educational exchanges? Could it be aid? Could it be military support? I mean, different things that could be done by the international community, because clearly this file is the root to all problems and challenges in the Middle East. And it's been decades, and it really needs quick resolution.
But you say quick resolution, but with the current government in Israel and the current control in Gaza, I would even add Ramallah as well, there is no momentum to achieve this. So I fear, I would like to see a two-state solution. I think it is the right way to go, as you say, in many ways, for many, many reasons. Never mind, basic humanity requires it. But there are too many people who want the miserable status quo. And without some very direct action on Netanyahu to change the mindset of the Israeli electorate, to find a more hopeful way forward, that's simply not going to happen. Never mind what's happening in Gaza with Hamas.
Look, it's unfortunate that sometimes things need to hit rock bottom before people wake up and change course. And some would say that we've hit rock bottom a long time ago in this conflict. But it doesn't seem to be the case on both sides of the warring party. But let me add something too, Francis. To equate Hamas with Israel is also something that needs to be looked at with a careful lens. Yes, there has been belligerence and violence from both sides, but the scale and proportion from the Israeli side is something. And we all know that they have the technology to really focus on specific targets, as they have done in Lebanon, as they have done in Iran when they assassinated Mishal. So for that not to be the case when they're hitting Gaza, it just tells you that it's beyond just targeting Hamas. It's about more than that. And it's not only in Gaza, it's also in the West Bank. What's happening there with the annexations is very, very disturbing.
I agree with this. We need to move on, but on the West Bank, I think that what's happening on the West Bank in some ways is more strategic and more important, because that's where Israel really sees its future. And it's also the base of Palestine. A great supporter of Palestine has been the European Union. You yourself have studied what's happening with the European Union. I'd be interested in your take on this. European Union has been talking with the GCC for as long as I can remember. These two clubs have been discussing issues with some goodwill, but no great root. So the European Union, I'm an admirer of the European Union. I think, but unfortunately, in its foreign policy, it remains I won't say ineffective. It remains sort of behind the curve. It's pushing, but doesn't take a lead. I'm curious what you think about the European Union in relation to the GCC particularly, but also as it involved, it's one of the major supports of the Palestinian Authority as well.
We see more eye to eye with the EU when it comes to the Palestine issue, and I think that's a welcoming development from our end in the Gulf. That support with the global alliance is also something that kind of softens the double standards that we saw at the beginning of the war on Gaza, where there were pro-European voices and those that were anti-Palestine. But I think that consolidated with time. Look, the EU GCC story is quite an interesting one. We're contiguous. We're next to each other geographically. There's a lot of exchange when it comes to trade. They're one of our top trading partners, and there is a lot of goodwill, student exchanges, touristic visits, maritime security support, by the way. All of that is there. But when it came to the trade FTA, for some reason, two things stood in the way: regulation and the whole human rights discourse. And I think the EU has moved beyond that, because now, especially with the interesting development in terms of the transatlantic relationship, I think they've become more keen on developing other relations. And they've developed, they've put out a Gulf strategy in 2022. Yep. They've appointed a special representative in 2023. And even more recently, just a few months ago, late 2024, within the European Commission, they created a whole Directorate General for the MENA region. So I think there is a lot of goodwill, and the discussions are ongoing. And they've actually moved a bit when it came to starting the negotiations with the UAE in particular, when it comes to the CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU. Now, that could be a double-edged sword, because some in the Gulf wanted to do the whole package altogether. But I think it's good to have that mix so that it excites the base of both sides to try and move us forward.
I don't know. Did they sign this CEPA with the UAE?
No. They announced the beginning of the negotiations.
Right.
So I think it's good signaling to get the file moving forward. Yeah. If you ask our friends in the UAE, they'll tell you that the CEPA is not the FTA. It's a different concept altogether. But I think there are intersections. And I think we would benefit from looking at this as a whole package. And I believe that that's the intention. But let me tell you, it's not only about trade. Trade is a very important component, and much can be done if an FTA goes forward. But we also have other concerns. You mentioned Palestine, and I agree. There is also the whole notion of an integrated security kind of feel. We are not direct recipients of those huge tariffs now, which seem to be in suspended animation. We don't know where they're going to go for most countries. But that said, we would still feel the pains of it in an indirect way if our major partners, whether it's China or the EU, get hit. So I think there needs to be that clarity of purpose. There needs to be very clear bilateral relations between the EU and the GCC that can shield both regions from any such global developments, whether coming from the US, as is the case now, or from other regions in the world.
I mean, you said previously it's unipolar still in the world, but in terms of trade, it's certainly more multipolar than in terms of security. And with the end of the old WTA, and it looks as though such agreements are a very important part. So there's many, as you say, the EU, the GCC, and others are looking to have more close relationships on trade.
Indeed. Let me tell you, I mean, I said it's unipolar when it came to the military dimension. That's what I meant. I just wanted to clarify. I think one could argue is that different visions are out there on how the world is seen. And it's you can even say bipolar when it came to trade, to even be more specific when you bring in China and the US in particular, but certainly multipolar when it comes to trying to manage other different files. And if I may add, I think from the Gulf, we don't see the world through a polar lens, really. I mean, we look at it as nodes. We look at it as networks, minilaterals, trade routes, connectivity agendas. So we transcend the national to think of ways that would match our times, because we're moving into uncharted terrain in which the nation state as a unit is no longer sufficient. I mean, you need to really develop things that go beyond that. And that's why you need a pragmatic lens to look at other parts of the world without holding very hard to any specific ideology.
Talking nation states, as we move to our last topic, a nation state which has just gone through a traumatic change is Syria, with Ahmed al-Sharaa coming down and the Assad regime going. Now, there's been quite a lot of Gulf connections with the new regime, but necessarily with some caution, because the new regime comes out of a radical Islamic base, but seems to be talking the talk about being a new, more open administration. Sharaa has just been to the UAE, I think. He's certainly visited Saudi Arabia already. The Gulf, I think, must reach out to the new regime quite quickly. Otherwise, a lot of what will happen in Syria will get stuck. How quickly do you think it will go, or how will the relationship work, given those doubts?
I'm glad that the Gulf is not punching below its weight anymore when it comes to dealing with foreign files surrounding the region and that are with direct impact to the Gulf. And I say this because, Francis, in the past we haven't done so.
Yes.
And I'm thinking 2003, Iraq was left as an open space for Iran to enter, and they continue to be there in a quite dominant fashion.
Correct.
I think, remember in 2013, speaking of Syria, when the Saudis were not happy with how the UN and other international parties are working on the Syria file, they let go of their UNSC seat and they gave it away to another country. I think it was Jordan. That's not the attitude right now. And thankfully so. We need to engage, we need to present our views, and we need to be open to different variations of mindsets and philosophies. The story of Bashar and the transitional government in Syria is quite an interesting one, not only for Syria particularly, but for the sense of how Islamism transforms and morphs itself. We've seen that file end in a different way in Egypt, for example. Let's see. I mean, the verdict is not out. The messaging, as you said, has been very, very on point when it came to pushing on the Syrian file. And not only has the Gulf been supportive, and I give the example that we just saw yesterday, that the Saudis and the Qataris bailed Syria when it came to their World Bank loans so
Yes.
that they can engage with them. But let me tell you, even the waiver, one of the last acts of the Biden administration was the 6-month waiver on certain sanctions or certain, and that's something that could be renewed by the Trump administration. We've seen some sense of that. And there has been talks between the US and Syria. We know that there has been exchange of letters. They're trying to work their best. The EU has exempted or waived temporarily some of their sanctions. Those sanctions came against the Assad regime. We have a new face in place. We need to give them a chance, because if you don't support them and react to them, you're going to allow for extremism to spread. Don't forget that ISIS was ruling parts of that space a few years ago. And currently you have two huge camps of previous fighters, of families of extremists that are still living there, and some of them are not being repatriated or not being welcomed by their own countries.
Correct.
So it's a mix of files that is also suffering from further Israeli incursions. I mean, Israel, instead of not pushing itself into that file, has only gone through decimating their airfield bases, their different centers, and that's not helpful. And I think we need to have a firmer stand against this aggression. We need to watch and see the attitudes of the place. I've spoken to many Syrians who are more expert in this file than me, and they recognize that there are shortcomings. But Francis, it's a post-regime change kind of scenario. So you're going to see different things. And the basic fact of them being able to express themselves within Syria is
Yes.
something that's so liberating to them. So I think that's something that we need to, keep in mind, try to support, try to steer, and try to benefit, again, as we started the conversation, the welfare of people.
Because
boils
there
down-
we're not talking about just a change of regime. We're talking about millions of displaced internally, millions displaced externally. So simply getting people back to their homes is a huge task.
one of the biggest numbers since World War II, let me tell you.
Yes.
So Syria is something that we need to focus on, support, and lift those sanctions.
Bader, thank you. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
optimistic, and thank you for seeing a way forward, which I think many have to listen to. Otherwise, in this area, things just get stuck. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Francis.
You heard there Bader talking about a whole range of issues, relatively optimistically, or at least supporting the right route forward. You might agree with him, you might disagree. Either way, please be in touch with us, tell us, that'll help us shape our future issues. Meanwhile, thank you very much for being here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.